The inner folds of the Helix Nebula had always reminded Leora Keshet of bruised fruit, mercupoled and sickly green, blotched with bursts of incandescent orange where the gases bumped against one another and went briefly incandescent. Yet that bruised ambiance was the only place left in the Orion Spur where the Sovereign's sensor web was thin enough to allow raiders to move unseen. For the last 8 days, Lyra's band of nebula harvesters had drifted through the currents, pretending to be just another resource skiff stripping trace metals while they plotted the most unlikely boarding operation in modern naval history. The Sovereign flagship, Imperator's Grace, was too large to bring into a planetary dry dock. It had been built and provisioned in space and had never descended into a well of gravity. 5 kilometers from prow to engine cowl, armored with ablative ceramics and a lattice of ablanium fiber that rippled like mercury when struck by particle beams, this ship was a moving city-state. A frontal assault was impossible, and any ordinary boarding attempt would be vaporized 5 clicks from her hull. But harvester crews were famous for making the impossible merely difficult. Yura floated beside the viewport of her skiff, the Anata, listening to the scratchy interplay of voices on the encrypted comm loop. 27 separate rigs were scattered across a 100-kilometer stretch of the nebula. Each was a freighter retrofit, an insect that had grown an extra pair of claws, welding booms, array harvesters, and vastly overpowered plasma lances. To Sovereign cartographers, they were coded as civilian vessels with limited drive. In truth, they were rebels, smugglers, displaced colonists in search of a new commons. Whatever label people hung on them, they were enemies of any empire that drew hard borders. She checked the chrono. 1 hour to ignition. "Outer coil valves are holding," her chief engineer Rain Das reported, sweat beading on his brow despite the regulated chill of the engineering deck. "Mag lines are at 91%. We can push to full output, but I'll have to reroute from shield capacity." "No one's shooting at us yet," Leora replied. "We'll gamble on naked hull." Rain's mouth twitched, half grimace, half grin. "That's a lot of faith in them out there." "They've earned it." She keyed the squadron channel. "Final comm check. Once we light the candle, chatter goes dark." Green signals blossomed on her tactical overlay. Blue for harvesters, gold for support corvettes, and a single crimson diamond dead center, Imperator's Grace. She swallowed. The flagship looked like a micro-sun on her screen. "How did you wound a sun?" A voice, confident and muted at once, cut through the circuit. "Raven 1 clears on ready." Kobus al-Batar, ex-sovereign naval raider, now the unlikeliest ally. His job was to shepherd the boarding torpedoes once the plasma rivers formed. Leora had fought him once, in another nebula, back when she still believed conflict had winners. Now they fought side by side because the Sovereign was squeezing every free station for tithes, crushing border communities to shore up their failing economy. Nothing forged fraternity like mutual desperation. Rene tapped a crystalline plate embedded in the console. Capacitors primed. 58 minutes and falling. Leora took one last long look at the nebula. A swirl of pastel haze drifted past the viewport, betraying nothing of the violence to come. The calm before never looked calm from inside. It was tense, suffocating, alive with the held breath of hundreds of conspirators. "Give me a line to Vesna." A row of haptic icons rippled, and a secondary window opened. Hazy with static, Vesna Mirakiaden's architect in low grav beside the observation bubble of her own rig, Nadire. Her black hair floated like an ink cloud around a tanned, gaunt face. "We're green," Vesna said without preamble. "Implosion charges set in the outer eddies. When the first pocket lights, Grace's long-range sensors will pick us up, but by then they'll have seconds, not minutes. Seconds will feel like eternity to anyone manning their Psiwas." Leora couldn't help the tinge of doubt. "You sure the plasma will cling long enough?" "If it doesn't, we die. Simple variables. Trust the math. Trust the math." Leora allowed herself a thin smile. Vesna had been a professor of gaseous dynamics before the Sovereign defunded her university, refocusing all advanced research toward weapons design. They'd asked her to build efficient fuels for annihilation bombs. She'd fled instead, clutching a lab's worth of theory in a single quantum key. That key those models made today possible. "See you on the other side," Leora said, and severed the channel. 50 minutes. She floated across the cramped bridge, weaving between exposed conduits, checking each crew station. Jax at nav, Perna at sensors, Rain below decks. 4 more techs strapping into emergency couches, aft. Her palm rested on the back of Jax's chair. "Plot weaves ready?" He nodded, fingers dancing. "Once the river opens, I feed vector packages to torpedoes and to Ravenflight. Harvester thrusters will ride the edges only, hull temps will spike, but we shouldn't melt." "Shouldn't," she echoed. "That word again." Perner spoke without looking up. "Radiation spike in Sector Blue 5. Looks like Grace's outboard buoy is warming up." "How close?" 30,000 clicks off our envelope. Passive sweeps only. Our flares are masking thrust." "Okay," Leora breathed through her nose. She could feel the precarious balance. One ping too much on the wrong wavelength, and they'd be pinned like fireflies. But so far, they were ghosts. 40 minutes. She turned off-bridge ambient, drowning them in silence broken only by subtle mechanical whirs. Her mind drifted backward. 2 years to her kid Zima. 6, then, building paper ships in the low-grav playroom of the Crescent Station refugee ward. Zima folded a square of plastifilm, put it on the air current from the recycler vent, and laughed as it sailed. Leora had promised her a home. Instead, she had signed on to this suicidal crusade. She felt the echo of guilt, tamped it down. If the Sovereign won, there would be no homes for any of them. 30 minutes. Vesna's rig began the dance. On sensors, Nadiri dipped below the ecliptic, towing a swarm of bubble charges stitched together by nanocable. She rotated the cluster 90 degrees, aligning with a dense gradient in the nebula's lower band. It was artistry sculpting gas rather than stone. Perna magnified the image. Spheres the size of maintenance pods, glimmering with the faintest electric halo. Containment field stable. Heat mix looks dense enough. "It better be," Jax muttered. "Too lean and we just cough smoke." 20 minutes. The squadron's corvettes formed a protective arc. Raven 1 through 6 Cobas and 5 other defectors, each fitted with grapplers and kinetic cannons stripped of guidance systems to minimize EM signature. They'd fly manual, old school, reading the swirl of the plasma with their eyes. That, Cobus had insisted, was the fault line in any empire. "They believe total data superiority wins wars," he'd said, but humans fought long before they had data. Strip away their relays and you find the old terrors still waiting. 15 minutes. Anata's crew braced. Leora thumbed open the swarm frequency. "Ignition in 1-5. We run silent until borders breach. Good hunting." Green dots flickered twice. Acknowledged. Time fractured into smaller and smaller slices, each second its own eternity. Finally, at T-No, Vesna sent a single, almost delicate ping. 100 implosions shimmered in the nebula. Gas collapsed inward, pressure spiking, then rebounded. The cavities brightened from within, glowing blue-white, and blossomed into jets of searing plasma. A tremor rattled Anata's hull. Jax swore. The wavefront's enormous, helm compensating. Through the viewport, Leora watched the impossible happen. Nebula harvesters ignite pockets of volatile gas to create temporary plasma rivers that carry boarding torpedoes into the heart of the Sovereign flagship. The phrase she had repeated in every planning session became incandescent reality. Rivers of living light arced through vacuum like a painter's frantic brushstrokes, each a kilometer wide, dancing, writhing, yet following the curvature Vesna's equations had predicted. Magnetic sheaths from the charge casings kept the plasma coherent, a serpent of violent color traveling at a measurable vector. It looked unreal, an aurora unleashed from orbit, searing a path straight toward Imperator's Grace. Grace's sensor veil reacted at once. Perna's board screamed. "They're going active. Point defense batteries spinning." Leora stabbed the intra-squadron channel. "Torpedo wing, release." 12 boarding torpedoes, disguised as cargo containers, unfolded stabilizer fins and let the plasma current yank them forward. Their hulls were ablative ceramic over hyper-compressed ice, a cheap trick to confuse thermal scans until the last moment. Within each rode 6 Marines in Scarab power suits, thruster packs, velcroed to hull to save cabin space. Cobus's Ravens dove after them, weaving on the river's periphery. Streamers of molten gas licked their fuselages, peeling paint, pitting armor. But they held course. The flagship grew larger on the scope with terrifying speed. Even at 6 kilometers, it filled the sky. A flat wedge seated with weapons turrets, hull plates slick and glossy under emergent strobe lights. Its AI had realized this was no cosmic quirk. It was assault. Grace's GIs fired, tracing space with flechette lines that would have shredded any ordinary missile. Yet every barrel was slave to algorithms designed for conventional vectors, not a living river of plasma. Shots burrowed into the stream's fringe and vaporized harmlessly, without touching the torpedoes at its core. Jax crowed. "They're missing. Compensation routines too slow." Leora didn't celebrate. "When we get closer, gunners will switch to manual." Sure enough, a second curtain of fire rose, erratic but deadly. One torpedo spun, clipped by a flak shard, and spiraled out of the current. It exploded soundlessly, a nova of purple shards. 6 would-be boarders died before they ever breathed sovereign air. But the others hurtled onward. "Distance 2 clicks," Perna called. "Ravens, break and harass their guns," Leora ordered. Cobus acknowledged with a click. The corvettes peeled away from the glowing artery, guns spitting tungsten slugs into turret optics. They danced kamikaze tight, trusting to speed and surprise. One Raven was vaporized by a broad-spectrum beam, yet the rest punched holes through the barricade. Leora realized her hands were trembling. She forced herself still. 1.5 clicks. Torpedo hatches priming, SEP charge at 1 kilometer. The plasma river flickered, energy sheaths unraveling. That was the plan. If the jet remained coherent on impact, it might slag the entire flagship, boarders included. The torpedoes burst free of the dissipating torrent, micro-thrusters flaring cold blue as they homed on predetermined seams in Grace's armor maintenance fence that opened only during deep space docking, now forcibly wedged by covert sappers months ago. Impact. Sensors registered 12 No 11 SEPs detonating in tight sequence. Superelastic penetrators bored through oblinium, releasing clouds of ferrofoam that hardened instantly, sealing punctures even as they formed, creating an internal tunnel safe from decompression. Boarders flooded in. Rain's voice crackled up from engineering. "Plasma's dispersing. The river's done. We can't ride in after them. We hold position." Leora watched her scope. "Our part's not finished." Inside the flagship, the real fight began. Squad telemetry winked onto Anata's screens, emerald icons marking corridors, bulkheads, heartbeat readings. Vesna's remote drones fed data as well, networks she'd infected via prearranged munitions. Cobus's Ravens continued strafing, keeping Grace's gunners busy. If too many batteries pivoted inward, the boarders would be cut down in crossfire. "Telemetry shows Section Blue breached," Perna murmured. "They're inside a hydroponics bay." "Objective is main AI nexus," Leora reminded her, though they both knew. Without the nexus, Grace loses integrated fire control. Rest of the fleet is scattershot. She tracked Lieutenant Eriscal's lantern-leading beta team. Microcams on his visor showed a corridor lined with serpentine roots, thick as limbs, growing through cracked plating where maintenance had lapsed. Sovereign perfection masking rot. Eris halted. "Cross-junction, ahead," he whispered. "Thermal shows 6 heat sigs." Leora could only watch. She hated that commanding the remote tide, powerless to aid. Flashbang arcs burst from Eris's launcher. Beta stormed forward, pulse rifles thudded. 2 suits went dark. One's too catastrophic for suit med gels. But the junction was theirs. In the command spindle, Admiral Rui Morales would be reacting, rerouting security drones, venting compartments, maybe calling reinforcements from escort cruisers. Yet, without stable link to the Nexus, every command lagged. Vesna's viruses flooded the network, turning sensors to ghosts. Gamma Team reached a vertical shaft, popped grapnels, ascended 30 meters to a maintenance crawl, planted death strips, pierced an inner wall, and for an instant, Leora saw the Nexus chamber through their cam, a sphere of obsidian glass suspended on magnetic tendrils, pulsing scarlet. Then, Sovereign Marines hit them. Gunfire flicked, silent through vacuum. 2 cams tumbled, spun, went static. A third, belonging to Sergeant Wu, captured the moment he triggered a satchel near his own feet, collapsing a deck onto their attackers. Sacrifice for mission. Alpha Team circumvented the firefight, descending from above. Lantern's voice crackled. "Visual on Nexus? Setting charge." Perna whispered, as if volume mattered. Come on, charge set, T-120. 120 seconds stretched beyond reason. Grace's hull guns found another Raven, tore it apart. Cobus's craft limped, starboard engines trailing fumes. He pulled up, vectored toward Anata. Leora hailed him. "Status? Hull breach aft, but I'm breathing. Ammo low, target still blind?" "For now. Boom." The detonation read like a nova on the boards, a directed electromagnetic pulse plus shaped thermobaric overpressure. Inside the Nexus chamber, molten shards blossomed. The AI core, not truly sentient but close, died in a single swallowed sigh. All around, Grace's weapons fell silent. Railguns froze mid-cycle, coil capacitors suddenly dumb. Counter-battery fire across the squadron ceased. The sound of triumph on Anata's bridge was a collective exhale. "We did it," Jax murmured. Leora knew better. "We broke their sword arm, but the beast still lives. Let's finish." She relayed coded orders. Vesna's rig emerged from shadow, beaming a data torch at Grace's comm arrays. She offered surrender terms: stand down, jettison armaments, evacuate non-combatants to waiting harvester shuttles, or we tear your reactors open and let the nebula feast. Admiral Morales' face flickered onto open-channel gaunt, immaculate uniform smeared with ash. "Pirates," he spat. "Do you understand what you've done? This vessel is the keystone. Shatter it, and the border worlds will collapse into anarchy." "They already have," Leora replied. "We're only preventing further misery. No court will recognize your claim. We're past courts." She leaned close to the pickup. "Look out your viewport. Your guns are dead. Your reactor shielding is compromised. We hold surgical nukes sufficient to crack every containment baffle on your spine. Choose." Silence. 30 seconds. 60. Perna counted in whispers. Finally, Morales shut his eyes. "I have a duty to my crew. I accept your terms." A ripple of subdued relief traveled the comm network. In less than an hour, the largest warship in Sovereign Fleet history would be disarmed. But the mission's cost hovered in Leora's thoughts. 3 Ravens lost, 4 boarding teams reduced to a third strength, Vesna's charges depleted, 34 souls confirmed dead, likely more unreported. Jax turned, tears floating free in micrograv. "Is this victory?" "It's a beginning," Leora said. She keyed open a private link to Vesna. "We still on timeline for exfil?" "Affirm. Grace's remaining shuttles will ferry evacuees. My drones will babysit their reactor until the last harvester clears." "Good." Pause. "You did the impossible." "We did," Vesna corrected. "Now we have to forge what comes next. Empires fall by force. Peace is a rarer art." Leora ended the call and drifted to the viewport. The plasma rivers had cooled, fading to dull ember clouds woven through the nebula, like scar tissue on the bruised fruit sky. In their wake, Imperator's grace floated. Lights dimmed, a humbled titan. Rain's voice hummed on intercom. "Power conduits stable again. I'm routing minimal shields." "Spin them up," she said, though she doubted they'd need them. The fight for now was drained. She pictured Zima, still on Crescent Station, studying sensor feeds like bedtime stories. Perhaps word would reach the refugee ward. Your mother helped topple the fist that threatened you. Or perhaps it would only whisper in rumor, names erased by politics. That was fine. She hadn't done this for accolades. She'd done it for breathing room. One more day for free people to decide their own shape. A beacon pinged. Grace's shuttle hangars opened, launching lifeboats packed with non-combatants, engineers, medics, crews, families. Anata's bays cycled open to receive them. Leora's chest tightened. So many faces, once faceless enemy, now merely humans seeking survival. Cobus limped his Raven alongside, mag clamps locking hull to hull. His voice filtered across the umbilical. "Permission to come aboard, Captain," ranted. "Bring your flight deck recorder, I want inside views for the tribunal," he chickled. "We just committed mutiny against a regime that doesn't acknowledge tribunals." "We'll make one," she countered. "It matters what story is told." Because stories lasted longer than plasma rivers, longer than empires, longer, even, than bruised nebulae drifting through the void. Leora felt the truth of it settle in her bones like a cooling star. Below, the transfer of prisoners and refugees continued, lit by service lights in gentle oranges and blues. A ballet of docks and tethers replaced the frenzy of railguns. Another shape of power, mercy instead of terror. Years from now, historians might reduce this moment to a single tactical summary. Nebula harvesters exploited volatile gas pockets, plasma conduits, boarding torpedoes, Flagship neutralized. Clean lines on paper devoid of sweat and fear, but those who had been here would remember the crush of silence before ignition, the flicker of lives lost, the smell of burnt insulation, the shimmer of rivers that should not exist yet did, blazing across a void that had for once become canvas rather than tomb. Leora watched the last of the plasma threads extinguish, swallowed by darkness. Somewhere in that darkness lay future wars, future griefs. Yet she also sensed something she'd not allowed herself in years, a quiet sliver of hope. Small, yes, but small fires could birth suns. "Captain," Perna said softly. "Incoming message from Crescent Station. Priority flag. Put it through." A familiar child's voice filled the bridge, channeled across 1,000,000 kilometers. "Mama?" Leora closed her eyes, the ache, sharp and sweet. "I'm here, Zima. Are you safe?" "I am now." On the viewport the humble tyrant loomed, but no guns flashed, for tonight the nebula belonged to the free.